Hello, everyone, and welcome to the weekly DeSmogCAST, where we clear the PR pollution that clouds climate science and shed some light on the biggest environmental news stories of the past week. Joining me this week, I have Carol Linnitt, the Managing Editor and Director of Research for DeSmog Canada, and Steve Horn, Investigative Journalist and Research Fellow for DeSmogBlog.com. Thank you both for joining me this week. And I am Farron Cousins, DeSmog Blog contributor, and let's jump right into it. Carol, I want to start with you. You actually just got back from Lima. You were a part of the 20th session of the Conference of the Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. My apologies, I had to write that down because I cannot remember that. More commonly known as the COP20. Give us a quick overview. You know, this is a huge climate conference, takes place down in Lima this year. What happened?
So this COP20 was basically designed for countries to come together to create a preliminary text that all these countries will actually agree on and sign into a internationally binding agreement next year in Paris at COP21. So basically the groundwork is being laid for that internationally binding agreement. So all the details right now are being run through by countries. So what will the sort of different national contributions to lowering emissions look like? And so you have countries talking about what they're each going to be doing individually. We before COP20 we saw some of this come out with the U.S. China climate agreement and countries in the EU committed to major reductions. So they were sort of early out of the gate saying this is what we are looking to do to limit global climate emissions, and then other countries are bringing their proposals to the table as well in Lima.
And I know one of the big things, this is a story that made headlines, back here in the U.S., made headlines everywhere actually, was the involvement of Shell Oil Company. They were invited, they were a guest speaker, and first of all, having industry having a seat at the table at such a massive conference where we're talking about one of the biggest problems facing humanity, it seems a little counterproductive. Does it not? What happened when Shell got up there?
Yeah, it was an interesting thing. Certainly one of the most contentious participants in the talks. Shell's chief climate advisor David Hone was there. Probably one of the biggest sort of moments of conflict that came out of this was when Shell was participating in a side event that was advancing carbon capture and storage as a solution for climate change, and definitely a contentious issue. This is a big deal in Canada right now. Our first carbon capture and storage retrofitted coal-fired power plant just went online in September. So some executives from that project, from Sask Power is the name of the project, were there saying that carbon capture and storage will make coal a viable energy for the future, even in a climate-constrained future. And Shell was certainly there to advance that agenda as well, saying that basically that climate change, climate action cannot be done without carbon capture and storage. So this led to a massive protest where campaigners wearing shirts that said "Get the FF out, get the fossil fuels out, get them out of the energy mix, get fossil fuel industry out of climate negotiations." They were there. They flooded the event, and then they staged a walkout saying, "We want to walk out on fossil fuels. We want fossil fuels to walk out of the climate talks." And a lot of those campaigners were saying, the climate discussion about climate is dominated and manipulated by industry because they have every incentive to keep carbon emissions entering the environment. That is what they are. That is the primary basis of their companies. There are interesting endeavors from companies that are trying to move into clean energy, but for the most part, they are at odds with what many countries are trying to do. And another thing, too, is that you're having this conversation between wealthy developed countries and less wealthy developing countries, and there's industry saying, we need to provide coal to these developing countries. They need to industrialize. They need coal. And others are saying, no, we need to provide them with the financing to basically leapfrog right into a clean energy future. They don't need to go through the industrial process of building coal-fired power plants. So there's all these tensions that emerge in these conversations A lot of people felt like Shell didn't really have an honest broker role to play in that conversation, given their interests.
Well, given the activity we've seen from Shell in the past, honest broker typically doesn't enter the conversation when you're talking about them. But you did bring up a good point about the already industrialized nations, the ones out there basically at the moment leading the charge in carbon emissions, and that I guess would have to bring us back to the United States, where in the last 8-9 days we've seen two major developments. We have had both a ban on fracking in the state of New York, and basically, due to a defense appropriations bill, a massive expansion of fracking all over the country. Steve, go ahead and tell us the story. Let's start up there, New York, with Governor Cuomo.
Yeah, well, this week, Governor Cuomo in New York made a pretty landmark decision to becoming the first state in the United States to ban fracking. We haven't seen the final piece of paper that he is signing into law that will determine that. So, I mean, I'm still not 100% sure if there is some sort of loophole or anything in it that may make that false. But as of his statement made this week, at least, fracking is banned in New York. And this is huge. This has been a fight that's been going on for over half a decade in New York. And it's really, I mean, I think still a lot of activists are kind of speechless about the fact that this even happened. It's pretty unexpected, especially the timing of it. He just announced this week, I mean, really, he didn't telegraph that the decision was coming. Just this week, he said there will be a press conference on fracking. People didn't even know what he was going to say at that. And the press conference came after a cabinet meeting, so they were awaiting the press conference. At the press conference, him and members of his cabinet came out and said, something along the lines of, we wouldn't feel, this is not something that we would want in our backyards. So this is not something that should be in any New Yorker's backyard. So this is, I mean, you don't really hear politicians saying that sort of thing very often in the United States, especially at the state level or the federal level. I think that transitions into the second point, what happened at the federal level just a week earlier. In the form of basically a late Friday night news dump, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2015 did pass, and of course most people think of that just as a bill that funds the Pentagon. But beyond that, it had so many riders in it. It had things like a massive mining giveaway for the company Rio Tinto, and that's a topic in of itself that impacts indigenous people. But in terms of fracking, it had another rider in it that expedites fracking permits on Bureau of Land Management public lands, on all of the public lands. Before, they had something called a pilot project where they had certain offices that expedited permits. What this rider did was expedited permitting on every single parcel of public land in the United States for fracking. So I can't really emphasize what a giveaway that really was. And it was really, I mean, I don't think anyone was even really paying attention to this. It wasn't, industry didn't go out and really advertise very heavily that this was in the NDAA of 2015. They had a bill earlier in the year that was proposed. It was lobbied on by the Independent Petroleum Association of America, America's Natural Gas Alliance, and everyone else you would expect that would want a bill like this to pass was lobbying for it. But it wasn't until after it passed where they came out with a press release, the Independent Petroleum Association of America, and said, oh, hey, look what we got out of this bill. And that's actually how I discovered that it was even in it, was their press release, because I have a Google alert set up on some of this stuff, and it popped up. If not for that, I don't think a lot of people would even realize that this happened, because it's snuck in there somewhere somewhere past page 1,000 of this 1,600+ page bill. So that was one of the things. And the other thing that was in there was another important piece was something that will lock in fracking and natural gas infrastructure in the United States, and that was a provision in that same bill that makes it easier to earn tax credits to manufacture cars or vehicles that are powered by shale gas, basically. Called that kind of euphemistically called alternative fuel vehicles. It's provision in the bill, but that's another thing that passed. So we have both of these things snuck into this huge 1,600+ page bill. That one I found out about through actually a press release put out by Senator James Inhofe, the climate change denier, and he had proposed, again, this is a bill that he proposed earlier in the year. They took that bill and inserted it into a much broader omnibus bill. And one of these things that, I mean, how many members of Congress even read this whole bill is still a question that needs to be answered. It's a 1,600 plus page bill. They're really busy with other things. Staffs are, of course, doing 100 things in a single day. So we don't really, maybe this is just, to me, this is almost a stealth attack by the industry to get it inserted into this huge bill that was on a topic that largely a defense bill, but also now a fracking, a bill that also heavily incentivizes fracking in the United States.
Well, these appropriation bills, especially when you're talking about defense industry funding and Pentagon funding, these bills are how members of Congress essentially pay back some of their biggest donors. The oil industry is always a big recipient. You wouldn't think that they necessarily have anything to do with defense. They shouldn't have anything to do with defense, but a lot of these defense appropriation bills have huge giveaways for the oil and gas industry. This fracking is just the latest example, and of course, it's how they pay people back. You put me in office, I'm going to put this little rider on here for you, give you an extra, $10, $20, $100 million. This is great. I'm going to let you frack away our public lands, the lands that, public lands means that the public, the collective, all of us, every American citizen that's paying taxes, we have a stake in that. We kind of own it to an extent. I mean, and now they're going to say, like, great, you know what, frack it away. And, frack that is all I have to say. Trying to keep it clean here, but it is infuriating. Carol and the entire DeSmog delegation that was just down there in Lima last week, they saw firsthand we do have a lot of serious talk going on about how to address climate change, how do we address pollution. We've got to do something, we've got to make it better. And then back here in the United States, same week, we put this bill through that's just going to, almost destroy anything that the U.S. has promised to do in talks recently, and it's almost criminal. I mean, that's the way I look at it. This is just criminal. We say one thing to the world, we're going to do this to address the issue, and then, as you said, Steve, we do a late Friday night news dump saying, guess what? We took it all away. And unfortunately, that is all the time we have for this week, but you can find all of these stories and more at DeSmogBlog.com, DeSmog.ca, and DeSmog.uk. I'm Farron Cousins. We will see you next week on the DeSmogCast. Thank you.
Thank you.